So yeah, whenever you're ready, we're just going to start off with your name, your current position, and the year you joined the Senate.
Okay. My name is Parker Smith. Currently, I am the Off-Campus Life Commissioner for Student Senate. I'm a senior right now, and I joined in my sophomore year, so about 2.5 years now, I think.
How'd you first hear about Senate, and how'd you get involved?
I first heard about it during my freshman year in the spring, once the new slate of senators is elected. I actually don't know if I remember voting in the first, voting as a freshman, but I remember getting an email asking for applications to Senate for the following year. So I sent an application and interviewed with Hannah Clauser, she was president-elect then, and I got appointed to be vice commissioner for Governmental Affairs Commission, and then also I was the first historian, and the position was just created that year by Landon.
Very cool. So can you tell me a little about your experiences during that administration and during that year?
Yeah. So it was definitely a little overwhelming and kind of daunting coming in, and I remember just going to my first general body meeting and feeling oh wow, it's pretty professional, pretty formal, which is it's a little funny looking back. I mean, it definitely is, but now it's I go to meetings, it's not anything that I'm nervous or anxious about. But definitely when I first started, and I was a sophomore, I think I was, not as high up the ranks and close to sort of the leadership of that administration to have a solid grasp of some of the bigger plans and what was going on, especially because I also didn't have to go to the GBMs because I was a staff member and vice commissioner. But I do remember a big theme of that year being sort of one of the continual themes of trying to increase Senate's presence and kind of influence on campus, especially at that time because this was still sort of in the rebuilding phase from when Senate had lost a lot of credibility, which was 2 years before that, so now, 5 or 6 years ago, with the president, Megan Marzak, and that whole chain of events. And also my first year I joined they had just completely revamped SAC, I believe, Senate Appropriations Commission. Eleanor Holbrook did a lot of that. So that was the big thing then, and then just trying to restore some credibility, which I think they did a great job. Hannah Clauser and Courtney Mole especially were super professional, and out there all the time, and actively speaking for students on campus, and definitely actively speaking up to increase our presence and the representation of student voices. So that year was a big push around some of the student trustee issues, and trying to look at how could we get student trustee voting rights on the Board of Trustees, because they have a vote but it's non-binding. And I remember them a lot of times talking about OSU's program, and they were sort of piloting student trustees with real voting rights. And that's something we should probably be following. I think we will be following up on soon. But that was a big sort of initiative or priority. And I remember because of that, they sort of emphasized how important that position was. There were, I think, 25 or more people applied to the position, versus last year, I think there weren't even enough. They sent out a second round of, extended the application window or something.
Can you tell me a little about more your transition into the following administration, how you got involved with Landon's administration?
Yep. So I remember it was being in an interesting position because my commissioner at first, Nick Felt, he was the Gov Affairs Commissioner my sophomore year. He had approached me before winter break, kind of talking about we have to run for elections. I would love to have you on my ticket. And I think at the time he was intending to run for president, although he ended up not doing that. But that was interesting because I was vice commissioner for him, and I was also a staff member as the historian under Landon Lama. And of course Landon ended up running for president. And they both kind of asked me at the same time, and I was really oh geez, what do I do? Because I'd only been in Senate for 3 months at that point. So I was super, worried I would ruin one of those relationships because I I did want to run and, like, you know, pick a side. And then Nick Felt ended up not being on the exec ticket for the ticket that he joined. But I really enjoyed working with Landon. So I ended up joining, or was invited to join, Greenlight. And that was that was a great experience as well. Interesting to see how all that, like, the politics playing out at the student level was not really, you know, you hear about it outside if you're not involved, but seeing it once you're actually in it's pretty interesting, and I'm sure it's, you know, a little microcosm of what that really is at higher levels of authority.
So can you tell me a little about any programs that you were a part of, events, bills, resolutions, just any type of thing that you accomplished during that administration's time?
The first one under President Clauser?
No, specifically under Landon.
Okay. Actually, I was gone for the first half of that year. I ran on the Greenlight ticket, and then I believe my position ended up going to someone else who had, like, the second most votes or something, because I ended up studying abroad in that fall. And then I came back and joined the International Affairs Commission. We put on a couple small events. We had a movie night. I can't recall the name of the movie, but that was really nice. I think we did 2 of those, and then we tabled for, I believe it was International Women's Week, or maybe Women's Day, and that was fun. But that was, you know, a good example of some of the things that happened in Senate. Our commissioner was a senior. Also, our vice commissioner was a senior, and he quit at the very beginning of the semester, which was right when I joined the commission. And then our commissioner basically quit, like, at spring break and just didn't do anything for the, like, final month or 2. So we weren't able to get a whole lot done, and I actually, because that was my first time being a senator, for me it was a little unclear sort of what I could do, like, aside from just, like, doing what my commissioner was telling me, really. I think to some extent there are probably a lot of senators who still fall in that boat and, like, usually do. I honestly did not really do a ton that spring semester. But some of my proudest things that I have done were the year before that under Hannah Clauser, one of which was President Clauser and then Commissioner Felt and myself met with the university lobbyist Eric Burchard, and we actually had a meeting in the State House up in Columbus with Representative Jay Edwards, and Senator Frank Hoagland in the Ohio legislature, and talking about, I believe at the time, is a bit about textbook affordability, because they had been talking about this bill in the State House that would basically make they were talking about like a $500 student fee for everyone, and then the universities would, like, just provide textbooks for everybody, which if you know anything about how, like, all that stuff works, kind of showed it. They were pretty out of touch with that process, I believe, and that was, I think, also the official position of a lot of university administrators, like, throughout the state. I know they have their own associations, and we also expressed that we thought it was, like, you know, a step in the right direction, but considering, you know, thinking about the issue of textbook affordability, but it really didn't make sense. And there were also some issues about, you know, there's only so many businesses in Uptown Athens, 2 of the biggest ones being bookstores. So if the university had to, like, buy books in bulk from someone else and ship them in, so it was interesting talking to them about some of that stuff, and also trying to ask about, you know, why they both voted, you know, in support of budgets that provided less money for higher education than previous years, because the state funding has definitely dropped off, and they kind of just said there were revenue problems, but there were only revenue problems because they also voted to cut the taxes for the state level. So, but it was interesting though, because you could tell they were working hard too, the representatives, but I think they're probably quite overtaxed, because it's not quite a full-time job. I don't know, it's interesting, at least representative, but that's kind of tangential. Another thing I did that year, though, was one of the members of the Board of Trustees resigned, I believe, And because he had been indicted, this was Dr. Kevin Lake, he was indicted by the federal government on a range of charges, but basically he was a doctor in the Columbus area and was running a pill mill and had been making millions and millions of dollars, contributing to the opioid crisis, which Ohio is one of the worst states for. But when he was removed and faced those charges, the Board of Trustees didn't really say anything about it. I just felt like there was a major lack of transparency, given that they send out emails for other things all the time, like, oh, the Board of Trustees met this month, and look at this cool building that we just built, and they met there and talked about this. But something as major as one of the members being charged with some of the most serious crimes you could be charged for there was a small press release, and they were right, but I mean, they have their own website, and it was just so inaccessible, given how many emails get sent out about various university things. I felt like it was, especially when they're looking for new people for various positions, although they don't do that for the Board of Trustees. But anyway, we passed a bill in Senate, kind of calling on them to be more transparent about that, and basically I asked if they could send out a mass email to campus, just sort of stating the situation and making people aware, because given they always tout the core values of shared governance, and I'm not remembering the other ones right now, but basically they pledge transparency and everyone's shared voices, but kind of swept it under the rug from my perspective. Yes, that was some of what I did under President Clauser.
Tell me about your involvement in Bridge going into this current year, and talk about any accomplishments that you achieved and that you think is noteworthy.
Sure. So I still remember when I was studying abroad in Hong Kong, and I got a Facebook message from Hannah, and I think Maddie also, and they basically were just explaining hey, we were talking about Student Senate, and we were thinking about who was going to be running for next year, because we weren't quite sure. And then we just thought to ourselves, why don't we run? And we're going to need someone to help run the campaign. So then they asked me if I would join them as a campaign manager. And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. I knew at the time there were some plans for a couple other people were going to run that I was considering working with, but they ended up joining the Bridge ticket, which was part of why there was only one ticket for that election. But that was a good experience. And I think the fact that it would have been, I think, more exciting and in some ways better for students and for us if there was competition in an election. Ideally that just pushes us to more fully flesh out our ideas and sort of plans for the year. But it also, the fact that we didn't have to run against someone meant we had a lot of time to think about the ideas and initiatives rather than focusing so much on the campaigning itself in some way. So, but it was interesting, yeah, kind of figuring out who to recruit and how to balance sort of, you want younger students and older students, people that had been in Senate before and new faces to get some fresh perspectives. And the kind of things that I hadn't really actively thought about beforehand, just being a member to some extent. So it was interesting to get an even closer look into, playing an active role in some of that leadership stuff. Although a ton of work goes into that. People don't realize how many hours are put into a lot of those plans and discussions and whatnot. Yeah, and so obviously the election went well because we weren't running against anyone. And I was lucky enough to start the year with a full commission myself. So the Off-Campus Life Commission had myself, my vice commissioner, and 5 senators. And I didn't really know, kind of when we started in the fall, I was like, all right, well, what do I do? Because I had been a senator the semester before, but hadn't really done a lot because my commissioner that semester when I was on international affairs was kind of, MIA. So I just looked up in the rules, all right, what is the responsibilities of the commissioners and the off-campus commission? So I started going to city council meetings and kind of keeping Senate up to date with some of the ongoings in the city. And also I kind of, in addition to that, I then helped pull together the Senate leadership team, some of the relevant commissions off campus, university life, the Gov Affairs Commission, and we met with City Council, kind of had like a big roundtable discussion, just kind of talking about various issues, safety, sustainability, the housing issues that the city and students are facing, but more than anything, really just for the purpose of maintaining that line of communication, which I think is, even if nothing super tangible comes of those sorts of meetings, it helps put faces to names and positions rather than just being the students or the student senate in the minds of the city council people. Now I see them on the street. It's a small town, right? And they say hello. And I think that helps both of them understand that students are trying to improve our own culture and like the way that we interact with the city. And it also, oh gosh, I kind of lost my train of thought. But, just shows that we care. And then it also, I mean, for me personally, I have definitely started off as more like an angry position on some things, especially a lot of the landlord issues. But interacting with them then shows me also, right, that like they care about this too, and they want to hear the student voices, and they have gone out of their way to, be very receptive to us. And the president of City Council, Chris Nisley, will like send me emails sharing different events with me and things like that. So they're great. And we also, a major thing we did the first half of the semester, we met with the city planner for Athens, Paul Logue. And Athens right now is working on their comprehensive plan, sort of like an Athens 2040 type deal, and looking at which parts and elements of the city and the culture around the city should be preserved and are enjoyed, and then also areas around town where maybe the sidewalks are especially bad, or there's traffic issues or lighting issues or whatever. So city planner Paul had come to us, and he had been conducting a series of neighborhood meetings throughout the summer, and he wanted to get some student perspectives, and he was very genuine in reaching out to us. We tabled outside the courthouse with him and some of his interns. Alicia Lundy-Morris, our chief of staff, also helped orchestrate that, so that was really nice because she herself is an intern with the city planner's office. And then we had a student focus group with some graduate and PhD students. We reached out to the Diversity and Inclusion Commission, so the Black Affairs Commissioner, Brian Jones, was there, shared some really insightful comments on what it was like to be an African American in the city of Athens. So that was interesting. Things like having a bar that plays music that you like, right? Like there's, or like even a hairdresser to go to. Things that I personally had never thought of before. So that was really good, and I think it, just kind of reinforced that the city is very genuine in hearing the student perspectives and the input of minority groups within Athens. That went well. That was our big project, kind of first half of the semester, and now we have been planning on-campus safety walk. And the reason why the Off-Campus Commission has planned the on-campus safety walk is kind of to follow up a walk that happened last year. I was studying abroad at the time, but they did a walk with some of the facilities director, kind of looking at areas that needed better lighting or were especially kind of dangerous or sketchy looking just around campus. But one of the issues they had was kind of confusion about where the property lines were for university property versus city or private property. So I reached out to the Joint Police Advisory Council, JPAC, and the Deputy Service Safety Director, Ron Lucas, and now they will all be coming to the on-campus safety walk, and we will be kind of walking around the edge of campus, as well as some more interior parts, of course, too. But kind of looking at some of those areas where there was miscommunication previously. So I think we've done a really good job of following up on work that the prior administration did, that I think most of the people that will be going on the walk were not there last year, at least on the student side, of course. So it's nice to see something like that continuing. Hopefully we'll continue into the future. Even if, there are no issues, the point is to walk around and see that there should be no issues, right? I mean, there are some places where quite literally if you look down, you can barely see the ground on campus at night, especially back south. So things like that. And then in that, when we were talking about the on-campus walk, we also got the beginning stages of planning an off-campus tour of the city next spring, which I guess is something that normally I've been doing every other year. Myself and Gov Affairs Commissioner John Schlosser kind of suggested why not do it every year. If it's as simple as kind of taking a bus to the different neighborhoods in the city, takes maybe 2 or 3 hours one evening. Shouldn't be that hard for the people kind of in charge of the city and representing the students to do so. So hopefully that will become a more permanent thing as well. But one of the bigger projects we've had in the background of all that is trying to improve the housing situation in Athens via working on some sort of landlord like database or resource page of some sort, because as it stands right now there's no single resource that students can go to find all of the housing available to them, or even like a list of all the landlords. Aside from the city has a document, it's like a 100-page long spreadsheet of every single rental address in the city. But there are other universities like OSU has a fully like functioning search engine built into a university webpage where you can see all the housing. They have like a landlord excellency program and things like that. So our commission has been working a little bit on that. We reached out to a couple of major landlords and like housing units like River Park and the Summit, and just to kind of gauge kind of how they felt about some sort of thing like that. And they, for the most part, seem to be interested in that idea as well, having one centrally accessible site of some sorts, as long as it was backed like by the university itself or something like that, and could be done in a credible way. Unfortunately, there's no money for anything, and I guess it takes just enough money to build this website that it has not happened yet, which I think is kind of a shame. And so far, I don't think I've heard good enough reasons for why it hasn't happened in my perspective. So we've been continuing to work with the Graduate Student Senate off-campus representative. His name is Ricky Larkin. And they, kind of without having talked to each other beforehand, they also had the same exact idea, I think, because it's a pretty apparent, I think that just goes to show how apparent like the gap is here in the off-campus housing situation, because it is, I'm pretty sure, cheaper for me to get a house or rent an apartment in Columbus, or definitely in Columbus, also in Cleveland, where I'm from, than it is to live in Athens, which is a little bit unreasonable, I think. And it's kind of, there's definitely some degree of, I think, artificially inflated by the landlords, because they know that the students have to pay for it, and there's a lack of housing in the area, given the geography, partially. But I don't think we can just let them keep raising the prices forever, right? So kind of working with that, we've reached out to the Division of Student Affairs. I just actually had a meeting yesterday with Barb Harrison, who's kind of in charge of off-campus stuff. I think her position is the Office of Community Engagement, or something like that. And she kind of talked about different groups of. They tried to build a website in the past, but they did not get money for it. But she also made it sound like it would only cost a few $100,000 or something like that, and then have to be maintained from time to time. Unfortunately, OIT simply said that like they did not have any ability to do that at all. So interesting kind of seeing the more ins and outs of that stuff, and the logistics of like, yeah, that's a great idea. Like, we've actually, various people within town and on campus have been working on that issue, but there's of course always the issue of money stuff, which, like I mentioned earlier, right, it all comes back to state funding. Unfortunately, I think that's really something that Student Senate has exposed me to, is how, for being a public university, it's, I think less than half the money comes from the state. I think maybe less than a third of the money comes from the state of Ohio, which really makes me question kind of, and that was not the case, right, like 20, 30, 50 years ago. So being in Student Senate, I don't think I would have been exposed to those facts, and it really makes me wonder sort of the direction that higher education will be going, not just in Ohio, but probably in the whole country. And definitely Student Senate has made me more interested in just keeping up with community issues, and kind of caring about the institutions and people that we live with in our day-to-day lives. And it's unfortunate that people don't care more. You think they would.